Hello and welcome to the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. I'm Martin Jones, a human performance specialist, researcher and educator.
And I'm Jonpaul Niven, a former Royal Army Physical Training Corps instructor turned academic. Each week we talk to world-leading experts about how to unlock the full potential of those who operate in high-stress, high-stakes environments.
We discuss the latest science, innovative strategies, practical wisdom and inspirational stories in the rapidly evolving world of human performance optimization.
The Optimizing Human Performance podcast is produced in partnership with the Wavell Room and the Tactical Athlete Performance Centre at Buckinghamshire New University.
In today's episode, we talk to Dr. Preston Cline, the co-founder and principal at the Mission Critical Team Institute. The institute was set up to support the instructor cadres of small teams who perform in high-pressure environments where the consequences of failure can be catastrophic. Preston has a wealth of experience around human interactions with uncertainty. Some of the groups he's supported include military special operations, emergency medicine, tactical law enforcement, aerospace, and urban and wilderness firefighting organizations. In our conversation, we discuss the characteristics of effective mission-critical teams, how to improve cohesion, and how to facilitate within-career transitions both into and out of these high-stress roles. So hi, Preston. Thanks for joining us today. Both JP and I have been following your work for a number of years and super excited to do a deep dive into some of your experiences and the things that you've been doing over the past few years.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Can we start off with a broad question? Just tell us about yourself and your journey to where you are now.
So my name is Preston Cline. I have a doctorate in education, and I focus on the training and education of mission-critical teams. Mostly what it's really about is me trying to understand how people learn to navigate uncertainty. And so where this comes from is I got my career started in the late 80s. I know that was like 200 years ago, just after the Civil War, running 60-day wilderness trips with kids out of prison. And a lot of those kids went home to harm and to death. And when you're at that age and it feels really helpless and hopeless, and if you have a curiosity and maybe a little bit of brains, the world can be a daunting place, right? Because a lot of things just don't make sense. This led me to go back to school. I had dropped out of college. I went back to a place called Rutgers, got my undergraduate environmental sciences and professional youth work, and then went into the field, led expeditions all over the world. And in between that, went back to Harvard to study risk and uncertainty. I just wanted to understand how we got here. Like, what does history say about this? And then in 2007, I was working at the Wharton School, helping to run their international expeditions for their students, and started by chance interacting with all the teams that you'd be familiar with. So special operations and tactical law enforcement and fire. And the simple reason was I thought, man, these guys have been doing this for a long time. They've got to have some insights on how people learn to navigate uncertainty. And what basically I found was that everyone had the assumption that because you were good at doing a thing, you could be good at teaching a thing. And when I got into the shoot houses and the burn houses for the fire and the trauma units and the mission control at NASA and everywhere else, what I found was a bunch of people working really hard, good-hearted people without a lot of direction or clarity. And so what I ended up doing was starting MCTI as a training and educational program, much like a DARPA or a RAND, but for Monday's problems. Like, what are we going to do on Monday for the human factor? And so it's this idea of how can we do better? How can we do better moving someone from being an operator to instructor cadre? Because so much depends on that transition. So that's sort of the overview of how I got here.
So what is a mission critical team and how do they tend to differ from other teams, such as a sports team, for example?
It's a great question, JP. And what I'll do is I'll be a little bit what do you guys call them? Boffins over there, a little nerdy. So I'm going to go down that path a little bit. So there's a guy named Hall that estimates there are over 50 classifications of teams. You've got office work groups, you've got sports teams, you've got lawyers teams, you've got all these things that have their own unique characteristics. And when I was looking at my world, I realized that I needed to be really specific on what I was talking about. And so what I boiled it down to was I work with teams that are about 4 to 12 in size, and that's small group dynamics, right? Not a triad, but you're not getting big into cliques, right? So 4 to 12. They're indigenously trained. What I mean by that is you don't go to college to become a firefighter or a Navy SEAL or the SAS. You go to them. Even nursing and surgery, yeah, you've gone to med school, but you actually have to go to them, to the elders, and learn how to do the job, the tacit knowledge. So it's 4 to 12 people who are indigenously trained, who work with rapidly emergent, complex, adaptive problem sets. It's really borrowed from people like Heifetz and David Snowden and the Cynefin model. But it's basically what it says is these teams are dealing with the very edge of things that are emerging, the zombie apocalypse, the aliens landing. We need teams standing by with a capacity to resolve whatever shows up without being predicting it ahead of time. And then they do it in about 300 seconds or less. Why is that? It's because that's how much oxygen you have in your brain about right now. So if I choke you out, if you bleed, if you have a heart attack, we've got about 300 seconds to solve that problem or it becomes another problem. So whether it's hostage rescue or trauma resuscitation or person retrieval out of a burning building, all these teams are working in this temporal environment, this constraint of about 300 seconds. And that kind of learning and teaching is different than, say, learning math in primary school, right? When you look at the brain and you look at learning, it's different. And then the last sort of criteria is all of these teams, if they fail, it's critical or catastrophic. It's not like, oh, well, let's try again. They work in immersive environments, which is to say that once it starts, once the firefight starts, once the resuscitation starts, once the burning building starts, once the gunfight starts, you don't get to press pause, right? You're like, you know what? I need a do-over, or I need a minute to collect my thoughts. Nope. You're in it until it's over.
With those sorts of small teams in it, I'm just imagining on the stockbrokers, the trade floor, the decisions that they make could be considered critical or catastrophic, but they're not life-threatening.
That's right.
So those are different types of teams. Is it more about the risk to life or the risk to national infrastructure, things like that? Is that what separates these teams?
There's sort of two answers to that. There's a famous trauma surgeon named Dr. Charles Schwab at Penn. They named a center after him. He's so famous. And one day, some of the teams were pushing back against me because I was going to have Dr. Schwab talk to them. And they're like, listen, Preston, I get it, but Dr. Schwab, when he goes to work, his life is not at risk. That was their argument. Well, I went and talked to Dr. Schwab about that. And he said a couple things. One, that's not always true in Penn trauma. We have a box for guns. Like, it's not uncommon for someone to come in armed that we have to unarm. That's common. But here's the other part, Preston. And Dr. Schwab worked in the Navy before he went to Penn. And he says, let's say that I'm walking to work, and let's say there's a car accident and there's a kid in a busy traffic intersection. I'm going to go work on the kid. Like, I don't care there's cars. I don't care there's a gunfight. I'm going to go work on the kid. And he says, so yeah, life and death, I get it. He says, but you have to understand it's irrelevant to me. I'm going to go do my job. And so there's sort of a couple of answers to that. Now, with all that said, there's a difference, as you guys know better than I do. There's a difference between players who perform in practice and players who perform on the field. And it has to do with fidelity to reality. And so the truth is, if someone's actually shooting at you, you are in a different liminal environment than you are in a routine environment, for example.
Going back to your previous experience as a wilderness expert, is it possible then that a mission critical team can maybe emerge as the situation emerges? So I think, the time I've spent in some of the wilder places in the UK, you don't expect things to go wrong. And then all of a sudden something goes catastrophically wrong. And now you're in the small group and somebody's severely injured. So is it possible that you can become a mission critical team without really knowing, that that's possible?
Oh, 100%. Dean Erica James at the Wharton School, I listened to her talk, and one of the points she made, which I thought was really interesting, was a lot of people think there's a difference between leaders and crisis leaders. And she says, every leader is a crisis leader. The crisis just hasn't happened yet. And so it's coming. And so one thing leaders need to do is recognize their day will come. So they better get their heads wrapped around that. To your point specifically, though, we have a term called tactical swarms. And that speaks to these kind of emergent events that are sort of unforeseen, where you haven't built a bespoke team, but you have a collection of, let's call them experts, who happen to be there that you have to swarm to a problem. Trauma resuscitation is an iconic example of this.
Preston, within a mission critical team and from your observations, have you noticed common characteristics, common traits of successful teams? May that be in the military, fire service, police, and so on?
Yes, there are. And some of them are going to be obvious to the people that are listening, but I'll say them anyway. Some of them are not obvious. One of the first things is sense of humor. And I'm going to start there because it's actually one of the most important things. The teams that are successful have a shared sense of humor that a lot of other people wouldn't understand. And it's a couple of things. It's a way to enforce humility. It's a way to make meaning of very dark things. And it's a way to keep levity because everyone's super intense and they've got to be able to take a couple of wraps off or they'll auger in, they'll burn out. So that's one thing, sense of humor. And believe it or not, most teams I work with, that's one of their selection criteria. It's not quantified, but it's understood by the tribe that, yeah, you either need to get the joke or you're not going to be able to figure this out. That's one thing. I would also tell you that all great teams I've ever seen in any context do some sort of after action review or debrief, and all bad teams either don't do them or do them poorly. That's almost universally true. I would put money on that statement. If you are not making meaning of experiences after they happen, and if you are not talking about error or mistakes in a generative way, meaning like we're going to learn from this rather than a shame and embarrassment way, then you're dying. If you think of errors as shame and embarrassment, you are right now dying, because that's where all lessons come from. The brain is lazy. It will not learn unless you force it to. Right? So if everything's good, if you win all the time, brain's like, great, let's just keep on keeping on. Like, I'm good. It's only when you screw up and you have that 2x4 to the head, they're like, oh, I guess this is not working. Maybe the problem is me, right? To quote Taylor Swift. So, because we got to quote Taylor Swift occasionally, I would say weaponized curiosity. The people that I'm talking to are above the curve on intelligence. They're all going to laugh when I say that because they're going to look at each other and be like, not you, mate. But yeah, it's true, right? But they have a very particular kind of what we call feral intelligence, which is they're not so good in a classroom environment, but they've figured out a way to weaponize their curiosity and teach themselves how to learn in a way their brain will allow for it. So those, I would say, are the top three.
Within the Royal Marines in the United Kingdom, there's an ethos of that group, which is cheerfulness in the face of adversity.
Absolutely.
Being able to take a pretty objectively bad situation and make light of it. I see it all the time against some pretty dark situations that you would think, wow, this is not a nice place to be, but they seem to be able to make light of it.
Oh yeah. My favorite example of that, Martin, is that we've been in some bad situations where people have been hurt in the middle of nowhere and our options are running out and everyone's tired. We're covered in somebody else's blood and trying to fix it. And then it will start to rain. And my buddy next to me goes, oh, good, it's raining. I was hoping this would happen. I wanted the trifecta. And everyone will laugh, right? Because it's so ridiculous at that point. Like, it's so bad that you have to sort of be ridiculous. Like, oh, good, it's raining. I was hoping that would happen.
One of the lines that I've heard a few times from members of these mission critical teams, it was civilians would pay thousands to do this. They make a joke of a bad situation, say, people are paying tens of thousands of pounds to be in this situation, and we're here for free. I'm just cold and wet and miserable.
Well, Martin, we should just touch on that for a second, because something I'm trying to tell everyone around here is that people need the hard. They need to do hard things. We want to be lazy. Look at me. I love to sit by the fire and read. It's awesome. But what I also know about myself is I need to be cold, wet, tired, and hungry and stressed every once in a while to remind me of my humanity, remind me of my potential, about who I am and my courage. People forget that at their peril. And that's why I think so many people seek out these hard things. We inherently need them. And I think it's one of the things that modern schooling has gone off the rails on. We need to bring back some difficulty. It's actually really good for students. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm talking about adversity and challenge that is well facilitated.
Yeah, it's almost something as old as man, that thought process. If you think back to Stoic philosophy and their belief in, obviously, hardship, but also accepting one's lot and just being stoic in the face of adversity. And it seems to be now within our Western society, and we've got all this technology which does so much for us, that people are almost forgetting that and having to go to extremes to re-find it. Is there a balance to be found? Can we apply stressors to individuals which forge them through adversity and make them more resilient? It's certainly something which I think is pertinent, in my opinion, for mission critical teams.
100%. I mean, once upon a time, working out was just work, right? Like farming and, all that stuff that was enough. We didn't have to work out in addition.
Well, you go to the gym now, though, they're all sitting there on their phones. That's a bad thing. And you have to get them off their phones. Are you here to train, or is it Instagram? 50-50, phone a friend.
I'm always reminded of many years ago when I was doing one of my graduate degrees, one of my lecturers would always put a picture up of a gymnasium. It was an American gymnasium. I just state that now.
Of course.
And it was escalators going from the car park up one flight of stairs into the gym. People are reluctant to maybe put themselves in those positions on a daily basis, but I think that it's needed. For me, just being in the wild, it's that experience of awe. You get a psychological benefit from those sorts of environments.
Yeah. My wife and I sail. We have a boat. She's a former wilderness guide as well. And one of the reasons that we do it is a few years ago, we had a conversation and we realized we need something in our life that not only can't we fully control, but has potential to kill us.
Yeah, that's how I feel with my daughters.
Yeah, that's right.
Coming back to the MCTI, the institute that you created, can you tell us a little bit about the institute and how it came to be?
Sure. Interestingly enough, I can't actually tell you a lot about how it came to be. And the reason is that we were actually incubated at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania for 3 years. But our inception was due to the fact that several teams from around the world who shall not be named came together and asked us to form an initiative to help them move operators to instructors. So we were founded by a bunch of people we won't talk about, but that was the mission at the very beginning. And then we incubated at Wharton School for 3 years and went independent in 2018. We have a staff, including our director, our chief psychologist, Art Finch, who's a famous psychologist in SOCOM here in the United States. Our chief medical officer is Dan Dworkis. He is one of the emergency room doctors at LA County, which is the busiest emergency room in the country. Harry Moffat, former SASR, now psychologist in Australia. And then a group of about 40 or 50 faculty from around the world who do a combination of research. We're looking at problems, how to help cadre on Monday do better, right? And so we're trying to update our curriculum about every 6 months to stay ahead of things. And then we teach courses. So our white papers and our research turn into curriculum. And then we teach anywhere from 1 to 5 day courses to teams around the world, usually invitational only, usually bespoke and in collaboration. The other thing that MCTI does now, which is interesting, and this wasn't how it was envisioned, but it's what it's turned into. Since the wars have ebbed a little bit, and that's a little more complicated than that, as you both know, but as they've ebbed a little bit, what's been happening is the middle managers, let's say the senior NCOs or middle manager NCOs or officers, young officers, are not getting enough time with their peers. And so when we run a week-long course, it's often with an invitational only of multiple peers so they can spend a week together getting to know one another so they can build their network across oceans, across borders, or even across tribal boundaries. And what we found is that by learning together in a week, we love our curriculum, but we realize another part of what we do now is build that ecosystem and help build those relationships. And so we're one of the touch points for that as well.
Yeah, great stuff. And am I right in thinking it's international?
Yeah, we are limited through our inception to work with the Five Eyes, which is a UK-USA agreement signed after World War II. We work with US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. We also have agreements to work with certain European countries, but there's a process that we have to go through in order to onboard new countries. And there's some, obviously, that won't get onboarded.
I think we can imagine.
You guys can figure out which those are.
Yeah.
Preston, obviously you've got the team cast, and I must say I'm a massive fan of some of the speakers and work which you guys have done on that. Indeed, when it got passed on to me, I think I worked through all your back episodes over about 6-week period. I just went for it. But one of the things which I found really interesting on the podcast was your previous work on the concept of navigating uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that concept of guiding people working in those volatile and uncertain environments.
Yeah.
So it'd be great if you could sort of describe your thoughts on that particular topic.
Thank you. I'm going to give you guys a metaphor, and this is still evolving, but I want our listeners to imagine the following. Imagine that us three and some of our friends, we're going to go visit a hospital, maybe in London, maybe here in Philadelphia or New York. And we're getting invited by the CEO of the company. We're going to call him Bob, the CEO of the hospital. Now, everybody I'm going to tell you in this story, this analogy is a good person, good-hearted person, smart, intelligent, well-meaning. And Bob is one of these guys. He got an MBA. He runs the hospital. It's a huge organization. He's very good at it. He saved the hospital from financial ruin. But he has an MBA. He wakes up and goes to sleep at the same time, watches the same shows, Boy Scouts on Saturday, church on Sunday. He loves his life. But he chose what we call the ordinary world. And he's taking us to the hospital to show us what he loves. The machine that goes ping. There's a little UK reference there from Monty Python fans. And then we go down and we enter into what's called the orthopedic trauma unit. Orthopedic trauma is what it sounds like. It's when you're in a car accident and you break a bone or bones. These are the folks that put your bones back together correctly. They're also the people that do amputations. So as we turn the corner, Bob and us, we turn the corner to a window and we see Dr. Lucy amputating the leg of a 16-year-old girl. Now, I've seen a few of these, and every time I see an amputation, and I've been in medicine, I worked in emergency medicine, but still to this day, every time I see this, my gut clenches up and I'm like, whoa, that's not right. I need a minute to make meaning of that, right? And I'm a person who chose to live in the extraordinary world, or the world that is other, right? The wilderness, as they say. And I've left the ordinary or routine world to go into this critical, extraordinary world. And that's where I work. That's where many of my teams work. Bob did not choose the hard path. This is really important. Bob chose the ordinary world intentionally, and he's good at it. So he looks at that and he goes, oh my God, this is really hard. And I'm not going to use the word traumatic, but he's certainly shocked. And so because Bob's a good-hearted person, he's going to go back to his office and he's going to like, what Dr. Lucy needs is she needs some resiliency training. She needs some counselors. She needs some videos on how to make meaning of trauma and loss, because that's how Bob's making meaning of the world. But Dr. Lucy's really proud of that amputation. She'd been in discussions with that girl for a year. The girl just wanted her life back and go to prom. And she's really proud of the work, and she thinks she's doing excellent work with this amputation, so the girl will have no follow-on problems in her recovery. That's not what breaks her. She's going to do 3 of those that week. What breaks her is too many emails, too many meetings, too many trying to explain to somebody else things they don't understand. And so the problem with the teams that I work with is we live in 2 worlds. We live in what's called the ordinary world, where Bob lives. Again, Bob's a good guy. He's trying to be of use. And the extraordinary world where Dr. Lucy works. And the problem is, for many years, the mistake that MCTI made, and it took us a couple of years to figure this out, is that we were trying to make Dr. Lucy an MBA and we were trying to make Bob a trauma surgeon. And the problem was we weren't acknowledging the existential difference that we were talking about. It's not about learning. It's not about data. It's not about reading the right book. It's a choice about who you are. And Dr. Bob's happy with who he is, and Dr. Lucy doesn't want to be a bureaucrat. She wants to be a trauma surgeon, right? And so what we've learned is what we really need is guides. We need the 30-year charge nurse who goes and gets her MBA to be able to communicate across these boundaries and say, Dr. Bob, I get why you're doing what you're doing, and it's amazing, and you're a good dude, and we love you. However, what Lucy actually needs is a coffee machine in her office. What she actually needs just to make her life better is less emails, less workshops, less meetings. If you did that for her, her resilience would go way up. And so that's an example of this world that we walk in and out of, and some of the challenges with people talking about them like they're the same when they're really not.
Yeah, no, I can certainly relate to that, having come from the military into academia. It was a pivot shift from one extreme to the other. Yeah. And trying to find the balance in the middle has been been interesting challenge.
Yeah. And the thing is, Dr. Bob, he's seen movies and TVs. He, in his heart, believes he does see the same thing Dr. Lucy sees. That's part of the problem, is that you have to explain to Dr. Bob, sir, you haven't been cold, wet, tired, and hungry in that way. You don't understand what it smells like, what your feet feels like, what it feels like to need to go to the bathroom for 4 hours and not be able to leave. There are certain like kinesthetic things that you just don't understand, and that matters. And it's okay.
I've worked with some people who are trying to enter into this world. So they're going through that indigenous training that you mentioned before. They're trying to join a certain group. And historically, these groups are very, very secretive. Some still are, but there's now information about some of these units, these groups, these cultures. There's TV shows, there's books. And one of the challenges that I've sometimes faced when I'm working with these people is the quest for certainty. It's, well, I need to know everything I can about this training pathway or this selection pathway to increase my chances of getting in.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've heard from other people who've been in this environment is the need to navigate uncertainty, that the nature of the job means that you can prepare as much as you like for the selection pathway or the qualification course, but the world is uncertain. So do you think that these people, the quest for certainty is something that might actually disqualify them?
I absolutely think that. And I'll give you an example. If I was younger and we were go out and I were to show you a group of new wilderness guides, they fall into 2 categories. There are people that think that there's no such thing as inappropriate weather, only inappropriate clothing. And there's people that think that they get a vote on the weather. And you see these people and it starts to rain and the operators will just switch their gear and they'll keep doing what they're doing. And the other ones will whine like, oh my God, it's raining. We have to do this in the rain. And I'll have to say to them, like, it's the wilderness. This is the whole thing. You're trying to project your norms on this place. This place gets a vote. Whatever schedule we have doesn't matter. If rain comes, if weather comes, if somebody twists an ankle, it changes. So you have to be just totally comfortable with the ambiguity of this experience, right? And so what we tell people is don't build contingencies, build capacity. Stop trying to choreograph. It will destroy you. And they'll say that in CQB and other places. You trying to project future will actually disrupt your ability to navigate that future. Just be here now. Chop wood, carry water, to quote the old Zen masters, right? Just do the thing in front of you. Be in this evolution. Make meaning of it, then let it go. Have a short memory, right? Be a goldfish like Ted Lasso, right? Let it go, move on. And so I absolutely, Martin, think that that's the worst thing they can do. And here's how I know it statistically. BUDS, which is the Naval Special Warfare, many of you will know, is their induct for Navy SEALs. It is the most videographed, documented thing in the world. Their attrition hasn't changed. And the reason is, to quote Mike Tyson, you can have all the plan in the world before you get punched in the face, right? But getting punched in the face is getting punched in the face. And so that's the thing. There's no book to prepare you can read that will prepare you from a Royal Marine ripping your face off day one. There's no book that will prepare you for that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's that old analogy, no plan survives first contact.
That's right.
I've just written down 3 terms from a book I've just finished reading by a Professor Anthony King called The Combat Soldier. And so he talked about the importance of team cohesion. And within that piece, he talks about there's 3 important determinants of operational effectiveness in military context: adaptability, resilience, and team cohesion. Yep. And he sort of hammers on that those 3 elements, they trump anything else because of the dynamic or VUCA, that volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous nature of conflict or extremist contexts.
So what's really interesting about that, JP, is that only works if you have an intact team. And so what we're starting to see emerge worldwide is this emergence of tactical swarms where people are coming together where they don't know each other. So the question of our generation is, how do you rapidly build cohesion in a group of people you've never met before, but you got to enter into the fray in a few minutes? And that, when you look at 9/11 with the FDNY, if you look at other circumstances, pandemic, these things where there wasn't a ready team for this, but they had to swarm together and figure it out, without trust and cohesion already being there, it's a challenge people like us are going to have to help figure out.
Can we just pick into that a little bit? How do you do it? Like, if we look into these teams that get thrown together and maybe groups of individuals who don't know each other, but they're now a team, they go into the same endpoint. The importance is the same for each person. Like, how do we get those teams working efficiently and effectively really quickly?
Yeah, so I'm going to oversimplify this because it's obviously a very complicated question. But what I would encourage you just to think about in these things is The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. And specifically, the idea of a team as a journey, right? Hero with 1,000 Faces is a great book for anyone who's interested in this stuff. It was written in the 40s, still relevant. And I sort of dumb it down this way. Every team has what's called primacy, recency, and peak, meaning they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what I tell teams that are going to be swarming together is, think about your first 90 seconds or your first 45 minutes, whatever it is, depending on how emergent the problem is. Think about, no kidding, you're driving up in a Suburban, you've got to meet with a group of people and execute in 15 minutes from now. How are you going to actually think about how you're going to introduce yourself? What are you going to say? How are you going to engage them? What their needs are? How are you going to tell the story of what matters? How are you going to communicate the why? How are you going to tell the hero's journey? Secondly, how are you going to manage the peak? Meaning, why are you here? What's the event that needs to happen? Is it save the hostage, get the person out of the fire, bring back the patient? What is it? What's the goal? What's the why? And then how do we celebrate that to let people know, yep, we've accomplished or not accomplished our goal? And then recency, how do you end that team? What's the last minute look like? Yeah, it's chaotic. Yes, you're doing transitions, but think about it. How do you end the team? You're going to disperse. How do you grab everybody in a huddle really quick and say thank you? So that's how I think about that stuff, because it won't be the first time. It's going to be the third time you do it that your reputation will get out there, and then people will start to go, oh, I'm going to Martin's team. We'll be good. We'll be good.
I don't think people do say that.
Yeah. Oh,
maybe one day. You mentioned debriefs.
Yeah.
Can that be that termination that you just talked about, these hot debriefs, these after action reviews, whatever we want to call them?
We just published an article in the Harvard Business Review on after action reviews. And this was in collaboration with Angus Fletcher from Ohio State and the FBI, and basically looking at the idea that AERs can often be very checklisty and sort of orthodoxy, but what you really need to care about is what story is the individual and team telling themselves on Monday. So really what we're talking about is how do you influence their narrative, their internal narrative? Because if they leave there and they're unable to reset from that evolution to the next one, because they're like, I suck, we suck, you suck, that long-term is bad. So you need to be like, you're the hero of this journey. You stepped in when others wouldn't. Not everything went well, but here's some things we can be better for the next time. So I think it's critically important, and people often give it short shift.
Preston, the individuals who most likely going to form a mission critical team are going to have strong personalities. And if you were to obviously parachute them in and you're conducting an after action review for, let's say, a relatively new team, is there any sort of guidance you would give in regards to the conduct of an AR to ensure that it runs smoothly and that there's a positive outcome from it?
Yeah. Starting with the most junior person, everyone just needs to spend most of the time in an AR telling the story of what happened without interruption. Just tell the truth as you understand it. And then everyone has an opportunity to understand everyone else's perspective. Too often what happens, to your point, is some leader will come in with a preconceived notion of what the truth was and lecture instead of listen, and doesn't change any behavior whatsoever. So really, the job of the leader is to listen more than they talk.
Excellent. On the other things that you're doing at the moment, you just mentioned you've published that article on after action reviews. What are the other hot topics that you think that the people who work in these teams or the instructors who are facilitating these teams, where are the pinch points or the hot topics at the moment for you?
So we also published in the Journal of Orthopedic Surgery on routine versus critical communication, and this idea that we really need to pay attention to how we communicate when everything is calm, and then how do we transition when things are in crisis. A lot of new people don't know how to do that, and we assume because of the way we were raised, well, they'll figure it out. We're not around long enough with each other for them to figure it out. So you've got to be more explicit in a way that we never have been before. So that's one thing. Things we're working on right now are the post-COVID generation coming into the teams. They have some unique attributes. They're not bad. Everyone keeps saying kids today. We've been saying kids today since the 1400s. It's just humans, right? It's no different. They said that about us. So everyone take a deep breath. The thing is, they don't have certain skills for no fault of their own that we have to give them. And I'll give you an example. In elite selections, people will quit not when it's busy, but when it's calm. And we know that. The research is really clear on that. It's not when you're doing surf torture or you're in the mud or you're rucking or you're running that people quit because they have something to fight against. It's when they're sitting quietly by themselves or they're alone on the long walk that their brain starts to eat themselves. Interestingly enough, this generation has been stimulated all their life, meaning they always have access to some electronics. So they don't know how to be bored like you and I do, our generation. Our generation did long car rides with our family where we just stared at the window because there was nothing else to do. And so you learned how to entertain yourself in your own mind. So it didn't just go crazy. The kids today, this generation, doesn't have that skill, and it is a skill. So what we have to do, strangely enough, and I think this is why we've seen a rise in mindfulness, is we actually have to teach kids how to just be alone with their thoughts in order for them to survive some of these selections. The data on that is just showing up now, but I would project we're going to start to see that emerge more and more. So that's a couple of things that I would pay attention to.
It's really interesting. On that last point around being comfortable being in your own head, are you finding that that's universal, or do you find it's different for different personality characteristics or traits? Do you, for example, if we look at the spectrum of introvert to extrovert, are you finding that there are certain people who are very comfortable because of their personality, or is it just more of a, like you said, a generational thing?
No, I think you're right. I think if we look at researchers like Adam Grant or Brene Brown or others, there's a lot of research on introverts and extroverts. And I think there is some clear data that some are better than others, right? Where you get refreshed, where you get re-energized. So I am what's called a hybrid introvert. So I'm actually an introvert, but I've learned because I'm a middle child how to be an extrovert, but I recharge by myself. As I get older, though, what I've found is it's not so simple. There's parts of me that recharge while I'm alone, but I actually need to be in a community of learners to recharge my inspiration. So recharging my ego depletion, or what used to be called ego depletion, because I get overstimulated, I need a quiet room. I also need to be in a robust discussion with interesting people to get my brain firing again. So strangely enough, it's not so simple anymore how I think about introversion, extroversion. But I do think that all of it's a skill. I do think some people are better than other people. I think insecurities play a huge role. If you're not cool with yourself, and I was certainly guilty of that coming up, my brain just moved too fast. I was looking at situations all the time and it was relentless. And it wasn't until I learned how to control that I could just manage myself in group environments.
Do you think there's things that we could do within the training environment by which to promote the development of those skills, sort of shaping the environment in a positive way?
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing, right? The thing I spend all my time thinking about is, and you've met these guys, is the poor NCO at a schoolhouse right now, 3 a.m., working with a bunch of candidates, being frustrated because they don't get it, right? So I think a lot about this. And so one of the things I will say to that cadre is be careful to not exclude the white space. So too often they will come in and try to fill every minute of the calendar with stuff. And I will say with the kids today, one of the things that will be the most influential is if you can give them white space where they're doing nothing inside of your curriculum. And you're like, no, we're supposed to be beasting on them. And I was like, no, you're supposed to be revealing them. You're beasting on them so you can reveal them. Beasting on them only reveals their physical self. You need to reveal other parts as well. So that's one thing. The second thing I tell cadre is what got you here is that every time somebody asked you a question, you gave the right answer quickly. What will make you successful here is to ask the right question and not give the right answer. That means you have to entirely flip the way you see the world. We spend a lot of time at MCTI helping guys and gals learn how to do that. And that's an ingrained habit. And we have a bunch of methods we use to do that, but it's the hardest thing for cadre to overcome.
Do you think it would be a positive or a negative if you took a group of individuals, this current generation who are wired into their phones and so on, you took them into an environment where they did not have access to those devices, maybe because they can't get a signal or because for the first 8 weeks of a training package, they're not allowed access to it? Do you think that would be detrimental, or do you think the middle ground's maybe a better way to be, especially considering that they've grown up with these devices?
So I think what we're seeing, if you go back to boot camps around the world, any boot camps, Marines, Royal Marines, wherever, they're dealing with this problem right now. So kids coming to boot camp, one of the challenges they're having is it's the first time they've been separated from their device. And their brains are melting because of that. There's nothing else. They just don't know how to do that. And there's subsequent things about that. There is addiction to porn, addiction to Instagram, addiction to likes. There's all these other subsequent things that come with that we're not really talking about that have to happen. That said, I'm a big believer in the absolute neuroplasticity of a young person's brain. And my experience for 30 years, if you take someone who's an adolescent under the age of 25, because that's when the prefrontal cortex is still developing, if you take anybody under the age of 25, you stick them in a novel environment, they will whine for 72 hours and then they'll adapt. Or they'll break, in fairness, or they'll break. And so what I would suggest is that we give them the skills ahead of time. We tell them, hey, look, you're about to go cold turkey on all these electronic devices, but also on stimulation. And so what we're going to do is teach you some skills so that when your brain starts to eat itself, here are some things you can do to manage that. Because what we really want to know is their rate of learning and their adaptability in the moment, like their neuroplasticity, because that will tell us more than almost anything else.
I'm just wondering if you've got like a 19-year-old who's been on their phone since they've been 10 years old.
Yeah, or 5 or more.
Yeah, they've just had a mobile phone attached to their hand for a decade and a half. They come into one of these groups and we give them that 72 hours. They've gone cold turkey and then they go back home. They're back onto the phone. Did you have to do it over and over again? Or do you think, is there a way of breaking that cycle? What are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot of people looking at this problem, and I'll be honest with you, I would be lying if I told you I knew a good answer to this. I think everybody struggles with this sort of data discipline, we call it. What we do know is this. We know that data, information now, has to start being treated the same way we treat drugs, alcohol, and food. Unlimited access to it is bad for you, and unlimited access to the wrong kind is bad for you. The science is really clear on this. If you are listening to media, news, whatever, whose job it is to provoke you emotionally so that you stay on and listen to ads, there's a long-term detrimental, negative to your mental health. We know that. That's been clearly documented. And so what we're finding is that people have to take responsibility for having data discipline in the same way you have exercise discipline, food discipline, drug discipline, alcohol discipline, right? But that's not what your brain wants. I mean, if you look at me, you'll realize that I've never seen a buffet I did not like, right? And so because I have one of those bodies where I can go long distances carrying heavy things, that's how I was designed. So my brain looks at a buffet, and literally my primitive brain, and goes, yep, we're going to need to eat all this because we'll never see food again. Because, it's 10,000 years of biology. Well, the same with information. We look at information and we're like, well, I need to know more. And we have to find a way to say yes, but not all of it right now.
I like that. The data discipline. I'm going to steal that one, Preston.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, and I think I'll be using that maybe in the next couple of weeks with some of my students for sure.
Yeah. It's this generation's greatest challenge, I would say. Because here's what's going on. If I am your adversary, hypothetically now, and I want to disrupt you, I can just add tons more information into the system. It'll shut you down. It's the easiest way to disrupt you.
We've tried it in class where we've asked the students not to bring in their smartphones.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting when you just observe and you stand back and you see a few of them twitching, they're trying to sneak the phone out of their pocket.
Oh, yeah.
So it got to the point, we got a little box there, everyone's phones goes in the box.
Yeah.
And initially we had that. So there was a bit of kickback, but then what we noticed shortly afterwards is that their attentional focus gradually over a couple of weeks when they realized that this was the norm, it shifted.
Yeah.
And I would argue strongly that we've seen a positive improvement in grades for that module.
100%. Have you seen the science on distraction of the human brain? Every time you get distracted, it takes you 20 minutes to get back on task. And so if you think about these little hits from your phone, it means you're never focused. There's also a thing that people need to pay attention to, which is the use of your default mode network, which is your supercomputer in your brain. It only gets utilized when you're untasked. And so this is the danger of this generation, is that they're not using one of the most powerful tools they have because they're preventing it from activating.
Or they think they can rely on AI to answer their questions, which is even more dangerous.
Yeah, that's right.
Preston, just changing tack a little. So given the dynamic nature of mission critical teams, let's say someone was parachuted into one of those teams at short notice. What would be sort of the best way of onboarding said individual to ensure optimal performance as quickly as possible?
So interestingly enough, and I didn't think I'd be the guy to say this, but it's shut up and learn your job. And I don't mean not ask questions. Definitely ask a lot of questions. That's not what I mean by shut up. But don't express your opinion. You don't have one until you understand the context. If I was younger, I would have hated to hear that. I would have been like, shut up, old man. Like, I got a lot of things to say. Yeah, I did. And what I learned, and it took me a long time to learn, is, and I will have things to say, but I have to build credibility first. And the way I'm going to do that is learn my job and ask good questions, or even bad questions, and then find one ally, and usually a mentor. And by the way, strangely enough, with the right person, the dumber the question, the better. A number of years ago, I was down at a place looking at selection, and one of their operators shows up and he goes, "Hey, I'm dealing with this idiot student." And I was like, "Yeah, I know one of your problems." And he goes, "I'm trying to figure out how to help them learn this thing." And I go, "Well, let me ask you some dumb questions." He's like, "Okay, why do you hold your weapon that way?" And he looks down at his weapon. He goes, "Why do I hold my weapon this way?" And he's like, "Okay, thanks, doc," and walks away. And I was like, "No, I have a doctorate. I have more things to say. I have other questions. That was just my opening." But it's that perspective taking, that reflection of the basics. That's, why do I lead with my right foot or my left foot? Why is my kit organized on my body this way? Why do I wake up this way? Why do I eat that? Why do I drink that? Like, these dumb questions that we forget when we get older become incredibly important when you're parsing seconds and you're working in a fluid team. And so that's what I would say. And what's interesting is the generation today has massive trust problems with institutions, and they're not wrong. And so they want to ask a lot of questions. And the thing is they have to understand that in this world, that's fair. It is fair. However, in this world, in the extraordinary world, we're not joining you, you're joining us. That really matters. So there has to be a submission to the whole. You have to make a determination within yourself to say, okay, I have a lot of questions. I'm going to have to stow them for a second while I learn how these guys and these women do this stuff. and I have to sublimate myself for a little bit while I understand the context. And then I can start influencing. And if you do that, that's probably the most useful.
I remember talking to an instructor a few years ago in a similar sort of environment, and they said something really similar. I think it might be a Mark Twain quote where it's along the lines of, it's better to keep your mouth shut and people think you're an idiot than to open your mouth and remove all doubt.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's better just to stay quiet. You don't have to flap your gums all the time to demonstrate that you're effective or you're knowledgeable.
What I tell my nieces and nephews is to build credibility in their workplaces. I say, here's what you do. Be very quiet, pick your moment, listen very carefully, and towards the end of the meeting, ask the most important question. If you do that 3 times in a row, everyone will start turning to you. Not because you're saying things, you're not making statements, but because you're listening carefully and you're asking just the right question. That is a superpower. And if you can learn to do that, every team wants you on their team.
Yeah. I've seen people like that. They don't say much, but when they do talk, you really want to listen to them.
Everyone stops and was like, I'm going to listen to that question. But the person who asks 50 questions, maybe 3 of them are awesome, but no one can hear them because you wore them out.
Yeah. Some people do like to hear the sound of their own voice, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I'm super interested in the concept of a career transition. I know it's something that you've talked about on the Teamcast. It's something that I studied in a sports context about in career transitions. So I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on what's the value of learning about career transitions.
Yeah, this topic comes up in my world a lot. And what I will say is this, there's not a lot of overlap really between sports and, say, military, except for this case. This case is almost identical. There's a movie, a documentary about Olympic athletes, what happens to them after the Olympics. And it turns out there's almost a universal period of depression, whether you win or not, whether you get the gold or not, because you've trained your whole life to do a thing and now the thing's over.
Yeah.
And now what do you do? And this is true in the military, federal law enforcement, fire, all these things, because your identity is so wrapped up in the pursuit or the journey or everything else. And when that part of the journey is over, what do? You've lost everything. So the argument that I'm making to those in power right now, and some of the initiatives we're trying to get done here at MCTI, is what I would like to see, and I'll pick on the military, for example. Imagine that we have a scenario where instead of you do your 30-year career and then you transition out and that transition is a cliff and some people don't survive that cliff. Imagine a different thing where you leave high school, you enter boot camp, and somebody sits you down and says, this is a transition from high school to boot camp. This is what made you successful in high school. These are the 3 things we need you to focus on in boot camp. Done with boot camp, 30-minute meeting with an NCO. This is what made you successful at boot camp. Here's what you're going to do next. We need you to focus on these 3 things. And you do 30 of those in your career, and it's a 30-minute conversation, but it's intentional. And you do 30 of these meetings about transition, so that last one isn't a cliff. It's just the 36th transition. And we've been building skills all along. Some of this, we actually know the answers. So we know that the 2-year guy has been ignoring their family because they've been deep in learning their job. So at year 3, some graybeard needs to sit him down and go, or blue hair, and say, hey, you need your family. Now start focusing on them. We know that the 7-year man or woman is starting to get complacent and overconfident. We need to sit them down and remind them that they can die too. We know that when you get into your 30s, you have to start working out differently than you did in your 20s. You also are going to learn differently than you did in your 20s. So if we had these markers throughout their career, then we could build these transition skills. So the last one's just like, oh, okay, it's not the end of the journey. It's just a different path on the same journey.
Interesting. In sport, in the UK in particular, there's a career. It's called a performance lifestyle advisor. They do that with athletes. That's their role. Yeah. It's about looking at the lifestyle of a professional athlete and also preparing them for the next step. I think you're right. There is a lot of similarity between these mission critical teams and sport. There's a lot of parallels. Do you see maybe a future where organizations like law enforcement or the military, that there's a job, or is it the role of the NCO? Is it just something we tag on to an existing job? What do you think?
I think it's at both ends. I think, for example, in the Navy, in the U.S. Navy, we have a profession called the warrant officer. They're actually situated to take this task on. So if we were able tomorrow, if an admiral says, okay, warrant officers, figure this out, within a week or 2, they could implement this. It's not a big lift. It's about intentionality. It's about ritual. It's about thoughtfulness about the whole life cycle of a career, but I absolutely believe it's coming. I think we're seeing too many suicides. I recently gave a talk and I said, one of the things you need to be aware of is from 2016 to 2024, for every year of MCTI's been in business, I've buried a friend of mine. And some of that's been combat, some of that's been fire, but most of it's suicide. And I'm not talking about random strangers. I'm talking about friends of mine, colleagues of mine. And so we can talk until we're blue in our face about it, but I am highly motivated to find a solution on this. And one of the depressing parts is in 2023, I went to 3 or 4 summits in the US where the leading authorities and operators came together to look at this. And my conclusion sadly was, after about the 3rd or 4th one, is we have a group of incredibly talented, motivated, and good-hearted people looking at a problem they don't know how to solve with a group of people that don't want their help. And that is the saddest conclusion I've ever come to. Like, it snapped me for a little bit. And so what I decided to do was do what I normally do, which is just go, right, they just need to be yelled at more. So we just need to bounce some foreheads off some tables, and we need to change some behaviors. And there's a certain truth to that. Like, we need to grab some people who think they're the coolest in the world and jack them up a little bit and say, you're not as cool as you think you are, and your friends are trying to keep you alive. And I know you think you're special. You're not as special as you think you are in this regard. And then for all you psychologists, you guys have been working since the 20s on this issue. We're not seeing a change. It's time to think differently. And so I'm pretty ruthless about it, only because I'm tired of bearing to my friends.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think it's very, very important. It's like you say, life and death ultimately.
Yeah.
Let's hope there's an answer. Let's hope there's something that we can do and find a solution.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be a constellation of answers. And I think that's what's emerging, which I think is great because different people need different things. And then people are working on this and they're working really hard on this and they're doing amazing work. And I don't mean to be critical of them. It just takes time and people are complicated. And some of them sadly were broken before we got them. And so it's not so simple to say, we're going to empower everybody with the protective factors needed. Some folks were broken before they got here.
Yeah, I remember hearing some stories from some of my early training, again, coming back into the context of performance sport, an individual who'd suffered terribly with their career termination. They had an injury that terminated their career. It was a catastrophic end to his career. It was one of these non-normative transitions and just a very, very broken person. And a colleague of mine had been asked to talk to this athlete, and round the corner comes a 60-year-old man who had a career-ending injury in his 20s. And it had been 40 years of trauma. A certain point of the year, in this case, it was the beginning of the season for his particular sport. And it just come back every single time. It was just a lifelong experience.
And Martin, that comes in a couple of different flavors, right? Because, you've got the track and field person who had their life sorted out and feels like their life was fractured or broken. And then you've got the people, same thing, except maybe they were in rugby that has this really tight community and tribal nature, and they lost their tribe. And there's different versions of this that break people, right? Some of it's about lost potential. Some of it's about the sorrow of losing their tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. We're approaching an hour, Preston. I know you're a very, very busy man, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. So I think we can start to wrap it up. And I'm really interested to hear about what's next for you, what's next for the MCTI.
I don't know if your listeners will be familiar with our paper called Residue. If you go MCTI and just type in Residue, it's a paper that was inspired by the actor Tom Hardy, the UK actor, who just helped me understand how method actors make meaning of experiences and process the residue of a rich career. And this year, we are turning that into a more formal curriculum. But what we find is that new generations are discovering the paper and it's having a huge impact. And the big thing I just want to make sure everyone hears me say is, if you're on one of these teams or you're working on one of these teams, it's really important you understand that you are not broken. You're not a victim. You're not a survivor. You chose the hard path. And with that, you have to take responsibility for the entirety of the path. That means your identity, your emotions, your coping mechanisms, all of it. Not for you, but for the people that are watching and the people that love you. Do it for them. And so we're going to be doing some work on that. We're doing some really interesting thing with NASA. We recently did some things with F1 that were pretty interesting. We continue our work with special operations. Much of it I just can't talk about. But I think MCTI, what I love about it is getting smart people together to look at applied problems. And I guess what I would encourage everybody to do out there is you don't need us. You have a network, get them together, pick a problem, get after it. Don't wait for permission. You're better than the existing solutions. Try something else. And that's a weak answer to your question, but that's sort of what I'm thinking about.
That's a great answer. And some interesting stuff ahead for sure.
Yeah, and I can certainly attest for the residue work which you guys have done, having listened to a number of your podcasts and read that paper. It was certainly an eye-opener, that's for sure. Preston, so if people want to know more about yourself and the Mission Critical Team Institute, what's the best medium by which to reach you?
It's really our Teamcast, our podcast. Associated with that, we also have a resource page on our website, missioncti.com, where you can read our papers. We're updating that now. That's the best way. I will say that before COVID, you would have never heard of me. Well, you guys would have. Most people would have never heard of me, right? And the reason is we spent all our time behind the curtain. What COVID did is we got a number of requests from medicine, both in the UK, Australia, and the US and Canada, to scrub or sterilize our stuff so we could support medical workers. As a result, we are now known to people. We're more public, which is very uncomfortable for me. And that means that a lot of people reach out to us. And what I will say is that we can't help everybody because, like I said, that metaphor between Bob and Dr. Lucy, we can help Dr. Lucy. MCTI can't help Bob. That's what Wharton does. That's what Oxford does. That's not what we do. And so I would simply say that as people are reaching out to us, I will do my best to get back to you. But the answer might be, unless you live in the extraordinary world, our answers might just be frustrating to you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
And I guess final words, is there anything that you want to cover before we wrap this up, or anything else that you'd like to reinforce to our listeners before we go?
Yeah, I guess for your listeners, especially the younger folks that are thinking about entering this world, and maybe you're a little anxious because you don't think you know enough, or there's too much information or whatever, I would say ignore all that. Be of service. What I found, and the people that I care about and the people I look up to, every one of them who's had a rich and exciting life, they've done so because they've been in service to something greater than themselves. And that's not always what you hear. But if you can find a way to be in service to some impossible problem, to tilt at some windmills, you won't always hit it, but you'll be around crazy fun people, and half the time you'll pull it off. And that's worth it. So I would say, get after it. Like, don't ask for permission, just start working. And the rest sort of follows. So I guess that's what I'd say.
That's great. Let's wrap it up there. Thanks a lot, Preston. Really enjoyed that. Thank you for joining us on the Optimizing Human Performance podcast, a Wavell Room production. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like and subscribe so that we can keep improving. And remember to visit wavellroom.com to find their latest articles, podcasts, and newsletters.
If you know someone who could benefit from our discussions, please refer them to our show. Your recommendation is our highest compliment.